Hey everyone, it's Andrzej on Software, and today I came up with one example on the topic of big events versus small events. It's usually leads to very heated discussions whether to go small events or big events. At the beginning I was mostly about big events. Now after working for several years in an event source system, I noticed many problems with the big events, and I'm now all for smaller events. And one example which I find very painful to deal with when we have big events is the problem with refactoring our code base. And the thing is, when you publish events and you publish them usually from an aggregate, then the aggregate contains some state related to the event, related to the information needed to publish this, to make the decision to publish the event. But often, usually at the beginning, when you're still new to aggregates, you make aggregates too big. So they contain much more state than they need. They contain some information that could be split into two aggregates actually. But what happens is that when you have those slightly bigger aggregates than necessary, then you may end up enriching the original event, with some useful information that happens to be in the state of the aggregate. So it's kind of like a no-brainer at this moment of time. It's a no-brainer because you just append some new properties. It can be some kind of like association. So I don't know, you have published a blog, so you attach the information of who is the author of the blog post, or I don't know, if you publish a comment, you may want to also embed the blog post content or whatever. So you kind of enrich with whatever you have here, which at the beginning sounds great, because in the other parts, in the event consumers, you may find it very useful that in one event you will find all or most of the information, and then it's easy to build a projection or build a read model, and you don't need to react to several smaller events. On the other hand, when you feel the need of refactoring the original aggregate, now you see the moment of splitting this into two parts, then those events are kind of public interface, so other consumers rely on it. And if you want to split an aggregate, suddenly you have a problem of not having all the information in one place. So now the refactoring is a bit more complicated, because either you try to keep the original event being published somehow, so you build a projection only to publish the old event, just to stay with the old consumers and not need to change them, or you change all the consumers, or you build some event versions. And all of this is a bit problematic, and I think the most important part is that all of this leads to the problem that you may want to postpone the refactoring. And I think one of the most important things about programming is that we should never be worried about refactoring. If I see a better design, I should be able to do it quickly without any doubts and without any worries. And the big events lead me to those worries. And on the other hand, when events are small and I move one logic from one aggregate to another, and the event is just some kind of ID and some one attribute or maybe two attributes, and it's much easier. Even if I move it from one aggregate to another aggregate, it doesn't really change the semantics of the event. So the event stays untouched. It's just published from a different place now, and this is much easier to deal with. So that's like my lesson from my experience and my mistakes from event source systems or event-driven architecture, that I prefer much smaller events because they lead me to much easier refactoring. And if we're still on this topic, I'm not sure if I advertised it on the podcast yet, but we are organizing this thing called RESTCon. It stands for Rails Event Store Conference. So it's the library that we built for Rails and being event-driven. And it's an open source library, so it's totally free. And we organize a conference, which is actually 3 events in one. 3 events meaning 3 things happening. One is the workshop. It will be a one-day edition in Wrocław, Poland, where you can learn about applying DDD event sourcing with Rails. The second day will be conference talks, advanced usages of Rails Event Store and event sourcing and CQRS. And the third day will be a hackathon, so how to contribute to Rails Event Store. So if you find those topics interesting, I invite you to come to Rails Event Store conference. It's early October in Wrocław, Poland. It's a city with very good flight connections with most of the world, so it would be great to meet you in person and talk in Wrocław. Again, thanks for listening and see you in the next episode.